Kind of cheesy. Hi. All right, so guys, today we're going to talk about the Korean War. Okay. Now, sometimes the Korean War is referred to as the Forgotten War. Okay. Hey, you want to put your phones away? Thank you. So the Korean War, guys, Forgotten War. So this is the last war, guys, that's in black and white, if you will. Does that make sense? In black and white? So, yeah, like TV, film, everything that people saw in the Korean War was in black and white. Did we win?
We messed them up good.
It's kind of a draw. It starts at 38th parallel, ends at 38th parallel. Right. We didn't win, but we didn't lose. So no big celebration here, that sort of thing. Okay. And another reason you could call it the Forgotten War is because we didn't win. You had a lot of people that just kind of wanted to like move on from. Okay. And the lessons that we could have learned in the Korean War were forgotten. And those were valuable lessons that we could have used a few years later, a decade later, in a place called Vietnam. Okay, so I just have this map up here, guys, just to show you again where we're talking about. Okay, the Korean Peninsula is here, and you can see the proximity to Japan. Okay, during the Russo-Japanese War between Russia and Japanese around the turn of the century, this peninsula was controlled by the Japanese. Remember in 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria. Yes? Okay. And so from 31 on, the Japanese continued to spread into other parts of Southeast Asia. Okay. At the end of the war, the Soviet Union promised to declare war on Japan at the end of the war. Yes, 3 months after victory in Europe. They kept that promise. Operation August Storm. Russia was able to invade China to go after the Japanese. And eventually, Russia got troops into the Korean Peninsula. The United States occupied Japan and then sent troops into the south of Korea. Okay? And that's where we pick up from there. Okay? So, I have a map that I drew up here, okay? That I'm just going to walk you through this 3-year war, okay? Now, we don't call it, it wasn't called a war, it's always been called a conflict, a Korean conflict or police action, okay? But it is a war, okay? So we're going to call it a war, the Korean War. Okay, so this shows you where Japan is, okay? This is the Korean Peninsula. And by 1948, China has fallen to communism under the leadership of Mao Zedong. Okay, there's different spellings for Mao, Chairman Mao. This is pretty historically accepted here. Mao Zedong. Okay. Now, remember Chiang Kai-shek? Do we remember Chiang Kai-shek? He was the guy that was our friend during World War II that we tried to help the Chinese. Okay, when World War II was over, there was a civil war between Mao and the communists in red and Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, Mao won. Chiang Kai-shek fled to this island called Taiwan. Okay, this is still an issue today. This is what we're talking about. Okay, Madam Chiang eventually took over for Chiang Kai-shek, okay, and democratized it, claimed independence from China, and so forth. We have been protecting Taiwan, or have sworn to protect Taiwan, since the 1950s, okay? So, when the Russians went into the north, okay, just like when they went into Eastern Europe, into Poland, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, in Estonia, they didn't leave. Now, United Nations was born, okay, and the UN Security Council, which I brought up recently with you guys, okay? And it was agreed to split the country in half and then have elections, okay? The Russians pulled their troops out. The Americans pulled their troops out. Now, the guy that came to power in the South is a guy named Sigmund Reed, okay? This guy had been captured by the Japanese, escaped prison, came to the United States, was educated in the United States, and when World War II was over, he went back, Sigmund Reed. Now, he was a little bit of a volatile character, and we were worried that Sigmund Reed would try and unify the country by force, like the South attacking the North. So we didn't leave him a bunch of weapons. We didn't give him aircraft. We didn't give him artillery. But when the Russians left, they left this guy in charge, Kim Il-sung. And I showed you a picture of him the other day, ladies. I thought I hit record on that. I didn't hit record on that. So you guys watched a different video. Okay? Okay? Now, he'll become the leader of the North. So the date for elections comes and the date for elections goes, and there are no elections between the two halves. It doesn't happen, okay? So the United States had pledged to defend the South, okay? There's a guy named Dean Acheson who is the Under Secretary of State. That's actually a job. You have the Secretary of State, and then the person second in charge of the State Department is called the Undersecretary, okay, with a capital U. He's giving a speech, a foreign policy speech about the United States and containment, that we're going to contain communism. Because, guys, we lost China. China was our friend, and we lost them to communism. So there's this fear of what's called a domino effect. You guys know when you're a kid, you line up all the dominoes and you knock them down? You following me? That these countries in Southeast Asia were going to start falling like dominoes to communism. So we decided we were going to try and contain it. Well, Acheson's given this speech. He's talking about Taiwan. He's talking about Japan. He's talking about Vietnam. He's talking about Australia. He's talking about all these countries, Philippines, in Southeast Asia. He forgets to mention South Korea. So Kim Il-sung calls up his buddy, Joseph Stalin. He say, hey, did you hear the speech by Acheson? He didn't mention South Korea, making it sound like the United States was not going to defend it. And so Kim Il-sung asked permission from Stalin, hey, I got your backing if I invade the South. Stalin says yes. Okay? Now, does the United States have troops in the neighborhood? Yeah. Where? Guys, we have been occupying Japan since 1945. We've got troops here. Now, are these the same troops here 5 years after the end of the war that island hopped across the Pacific, defeating the Japanese? No, remember the GI Bill? All those guys got out, a bunch of them went to college and so forth, right? So these troops here are green. Most of them have not seen any combat. They're sitting around drinking sake and getting suntans because by 1950, guys, Japan has been pacified. There's no threat anymore. We're just hanging out in Japan. Okay, we're still there 70 years later. Okay, now, so on June 25th, 1950, President Truman is awoken at the White House from a sleep. And he is told that the North Koreans have stormed across the 38th parallel. Okay? Now, the Russians left them machine guns. They left them aircraft. Now, MiGs, Russian MiGs, these are jets. Okay? They've left them artillery. And this is a well-trained North Korean army. And guys, the South Koreans are getting their butts kicked everywhere. Truman, in a panic, he goes, all right, what are we going to do? Well, we have this new international organization that is supposed to keep the peace. What's it called? United Nations. Now, remember, these four countries have veto power. Now, Russia, in the months leading up to this, wanted China to be on the UN Security Council. The other three countries said, no, we don't want China on there. Russia was boycotting the United Nations because we wouldn't put China on there. So Truman goes to the United Nations and says, hey, can we stop this? Can I put together a multinational force where we can stop this incursion into the South? And the United Nations says, yes, this is a breach to the peace. Now, the UN doesn't have an army. So you're going to have to build an army. And the United States is willing to do that. Truman's willing to do that. And who's not there to veto this decision? Russia is not there to veto it. They're boycotting. So the UN says, yes, Mr. Truman, build your army and stop the North Koreans. Okay? Good? Everybody follow? The South Koreans are pushed back to this point. This becomes known as the Pusan Perimeter. So Truman starts sending supplies across to the Pusan Perimeter, okay? And soon we'll start sending troops. So the American troops are told, hey, mount up. This Cold War just got hot. We're going to Korea. Oh, crap. Okay? Guys that are in the reserves are getting called up. Guys that fought in World War II are getting called up. Okay? Now, who's going to be put in charge of this UN force? An American. No, Eisenhower is running NATO. Who led the island hopping across the Pacific? Who better to put in charge? General Douglas MacArthur. Guys, he's in Japan. He's the governor of Japan. MacArthur is the governor. Okay? Now, MacArthur comes up with a plan. Okay? It's bold. It's a bold plan. Okay? He wants to flank the enemy, which means to go around the side of them and conduct an amphibious invasion. This is what he wants to do. Flank the enemy and invade here at a place called Incheon. Now, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's advising the president, say, no, MacArthur, this is too risky. You don't want to do this. This is not going to work out good. Now, if you had to put one person on the planet in 1950 to do an amphibious invasion in Southeast Asia, who would it be? It'd be General MacArthur. MacArthur tells them, he says, look, if this doesn't work out, you can fire me, put all the blame on my shoulders, get rid of me. So they relent. So MacArthur puts together an amphibious invasion at Incheon. Okay? Now, you guys are Kansas people. When you go out to Cheney Reservoir or Canopolis Lake or El Dorado Lake and you walk into the lake, what are you stepping in? Muck. Nasty muck. Okay? This is why I'm not a lake person. I'm a beach person. Like real beach. Where you walk in on sand. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sure some of you guys go all the way to Missouri to your lake, right? Branson, what's that lake? Table Rock? Yeah. Table Rock's nice. Okay. So guys, my parents bought a place on the bay in Florida. Okay. You walk out on the bay. Okay. You can walk out 100 yards and the water will be like right here. It's shallow. Okay. This bay here is shallow and it's muck. Good thing when we show up here at low tide, there's very little resistance. The North Koreans do not have many troops here. There's a little bit of fighting over some of the barrier islands, but the landing in Incheon is very successful. So successful, so this is the goal, okay, is to cut across here, cutting their what? Supply lines, which is what I wanted to hear from you on the last test. As far as sonar goes, we were able to take out the German U-boats and open up our supply lines so we could get our troops and supplies across the Atlantic. That's how we won the war. Now, radar helped with air superiority, and somebody even took the leap, some of you took the leap to say Britain was able to survive, allowing for the United States to have a launching pad to retake the continent because of radar. They're in. I graded those all on Friday while I was at the retreat. Yeah. What I haven't graded is your interviews yet. Okay. They're coming. I'm down to 9 book reviews in government. You know what I was doing Friday night by myself at home in bed grading book reviews for hours. Now, the boring life. Now, cut the supply lines. Retake the capital of Seoul. Dude, like this works, man. MacArthur just killed it. All right? We're not even into October yet. Like it's June, July. This is like late July, man. Bam, we're good. It's over. We're going to capture or kill a bunch of the North Koreans. Like, boom, 17 nations sent troops. Most of the troops that were there were Americans, but, 17 countries sent troops. Okay? This was a UN police action. Okay? Now, that went so well, Truman's like, man, that was kind of easy. What if we just went ahead and unified the whole country right now? Guys, this is called mission creep. The mission was to remove the South, or remove the North from the South. Yes? Mission accomplished. Let's go home. No. We're going to change the mission in the middle of the mission. They go back to the United Nations and say, hey, can we just go ahead and unify the country by force? Like the North was trying to do. And the UN says, yes, you can. And who's not there to veto it? Russia. Okay. So, guys, we start making plans to go north. Okay. Now, you know anything about the difference between North Korea and South Korea? They're very different when it comes to climate. And in one, you can farm, and the other, there's not a lot of good farmland because it's very mountainous. Okay. So when you get up into North Korea, folks, you got these. Okay. So here we go. We're going. Now, the Chinese, who are now communists, who border North Korea, say, listen, if you guys cross the 38th parallel, United States, we're going to get involved. The Chinese, come on. The Japanese kick the crap out of the Chinese, and we kick the crap out of the Japanese. They're a third world country. MacArthur's not worried about the Chinese. They're not going to mess with us. Right? So here we go. You guys, we're kicking ass. Take the capital of Pyongyang. Now, my daddy was flying C-47s, and he would fly into Korea, bringing in supplies. And then he would fly out body bags. The Americans had. My dad, at one point, did fly into Pyongyang, the North Korean capital. One of the few Americans that have ever been to Pyongyang. Okay? Now, we're going, man. We are kicking some serious butt. Okay? By Thanksgiving, ladies and gentlemen, the American lines look like this. This is November of 1950. So all this has happened in just a matter of about 4 or 5 months. Things are going so well, MacArthur says, we'll be home by Christmas.
Don't say that. You say that, and then, like, it takes 5 years.
And guess what? It's November in the mountains of North Korea. And it's starting to get cold, like really cold. Remember, these guys were over here getting suntans, drinking sake. Now they're in the mountains of North Korea. And they start to see a different uniform. And actually, soldiers that look a little bit taller. Just a few of them here and there in the mountains of North Korea. Who are these people? Who's wearing this other uniform? Yeah, they're Chinese scouts. And they're scouting our positions in the mountains of North Korea. See, the Chinese were not bluffing. They have a volunteer army now of 1 million. Okay, now, we're not bombing up here. We're not trying to antagonize the Chinese. Okay, but guys, they're coming. They are coming. Okay, across the Yalu River. Okay. Now, in this region of North Korea, there's a big reservoir up here called Chosin. Okay. The army is over here, and the Marines are over here. Okay. And as the Chinese come, they come in waves. We're talking about tens of thousands at a time. Okay, they literally, guys, you've heard the bugle. They blow the bugle and they charge. Now, some of these Chinese soldiers don't even have shoes. A lot of them don't have guns, but they're coming. And if somebody that has a gun shot, the other guy picks it up. You understand? Okay? They are going to overwhelm us. Okay? I mean, we are talking about full on, we are mowing down Chinese people, like piles of bodies, and they just keep coming. Okay? So the guys up in the front, the mountains, are going to get overwhelmed. Okay? Now, what the Chinese do here is they start to push us back, and then they start to surround us. Okay, so as our troops, the Marines fall back around the Chosin, the Army falls back around the Chosin, the Americans are here as they've gotten pushed back. Okay, now MacArthur's pissed. He's like, what the heck? So he goes to Truman and says, look, we need to bomb up here. We need to cut the Chinese what? Supply line. We need to bomb the bridges on the Yalu. Okay? Truman says no. In fact, MacArthur goes to Truman and says, listen, give me some tactical nukes. We need to nuke these bastards up here. And I will join with the Taiwanese and Chiang Kai-shek and his armies, and we'll just take back China right now while we're at it. Truman and his Secretary of State, George Marshall Plan, says this would be the wrong war with the wrong enemy at the wrong time. Okay? Now, the Russians have atomic weapons by this time. And they're fearful that this is going to become a nuclear war if we attack China. Okay? So Truman is told to stand down. Now listen, in World War II, did we use everything at our disposal to win? Yes. Okay, so there's a new term here in the military lexicon, and get used to it because it's still here. It's called limited war. So MacArthur's fighting with one hand tied behind his back. He can't bomb in China because, I don't know why, because the Chinese are killing Americans as we speak. So he's fighting this war with one hand tied behind his back. MacArthur is very upset. Truman will not relent. And so MacArthur goes public and criticizes the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, in the newspapers. What happens to MacArthur? He's gone. They're going to fire him. Truman's going to fire him. Now, guys, my dad never forgave Truman for that. But, dude, I can't go to the newspapers and say Miss Nielsen and Miss Harshberger are poorly running the school and not expect to be fired. It's called insubordination, and you don't do it in the military. You just don't. Now, MacArthur could have resigned in protest. Then he'd be seen like he was leaving his men behind. So he's going to get fired. Okay? Ask General Stanley McChrystal, who was in charge in Afghanistan, when he stupidly gave an interview to Rolling Stone magazine. It's a left-wing magazine.
Got it.
And he was asked about Obama and the rules of engagement for American troops in Afghanistan. Like, you can't shoot at a terrorist unless he's shooting at you, type of thing. And McChrystal criticized the Commander-in-Chief's policies. And as soon as that article came out, General Stanley McChrystal was packing his bags, headed back to the United States. Okay, you don't criticize the Commander-in-Chief and expect not to be fired. Okay, but you know, get fired because you're not a yes man. Telling the president what you needed to win, that's what he did. Okay, so here we go, guys. Literally, our guys are surrounded. You go north, Chinese. You go east, Chinese. West, Chinese. South, to get out, you're going to fight your way out. Now, guys, there is some incredible footage of this and incredible interviews of survivors of the Chosin Reservoir. Okay? Great documentary called The Frozen Chosin. Okay? And I'm telling you guys, they're interviewing survivors, and you're seeing guys with no fingers. Got a hand. No fingers. Okay, you're interviewing guys that were shot multiple times and survived, that literally crawled to freedom. Okay, it's amazing what these guys went through to survive. What they're going to do is they're going to fight their way out to the coast here, where the ones that do survive get out. Okay, it's brutal. Then the Chinese and the North Koreans are going to push our troops all the way back down past Seoul. They will retake Seoul. This all happens before the end of the year. All this up and back all happens within 6 months. Okay? The next 2 years, we fight to get back to the 38th parallel. Eisenhower threatens nuclear war. We get a peace or a ceasefire. Okay? Ceasefire. Oops. 1953. Okay? That's where we are today. It's 2023, so that makes it 70 years. 70 years. Everything is exactly the same. The North and the South are still divided by the 38th parallel. There's been no formal peace agreement between the sides. The United States has had more than 10,000 troops on that border for the last 70 years. Most of that time, around 20,000. When we went to Iraq and Afghanistan at the same time, okay, in the 2000s, when we were fighting both wars, we lowered this level to about 10,000. Okay? So if you talk to people that served in the military during the Cold War, okay, a lot of them rotated, to Japan, some of them rotated to Korea, a lot of them rotated to Germany. Okay? I was talking to my JV coach, Ray, who was in the Army. He was in Germany in 74 and 75, or 75 and 76. He was in Germany, okay, during the Cold War. He said they called him Nixon's stepchildren. I think that's what he called them. They were like Army reserves. So they called them Nixon's stepchildren. Okay. I don't know. Because they were reserves. They weren't, regular. Like a redheaded stepchild type thing. Now, guys, as I mentioned, there were 17 countries that sent troops, okay? So I'm going to come back here. So this poster back here shows you, okay? Now, North Korea originally had about 260,000 troops, okay? 214 of those 216,000 dead for the North Koreans, okay? The Chinese ended up using 2.3 million troops in North Korea. 400,000 dead. 2.3 million Chinese. Okay. United States, 302,000. South Korea, okay. South Korea had 590,000 that served. Okay. So between the U.S. and South Korea, almost 1 million. Then we get the Australians sent 2,200. Belgium sent 900. Canada sent 6,100. Colombia in South America sent 1,068. Ethiopia sent 1,271. Now, I had an interview with a guy that served in Korea, this class, okay? And he talked about the Ethiopians that served in Korea. He said, we were camped right near where the Ethiopians were. And he said, everybody was scared to death of these guys. They were freaking warriors, man. He said when they went out and killed the North Koreans or the Chinese, they would cut off their heads and put them on pikes around their base camp. These Ethiopians. So the Americans that were based by them are like, dude, don't freaking mess with these guys. Okay, they were warriors. The Ethiopians. Okay, France sent fewer than Ethiopia, 1,119. Greece, 1,263. Netherlands, 819. Luxembourg sent 44 troops. Philippines, 1,400. South Africa, Philippines, 1,400. New Zealand, 1,400. South Africa, 826. Thailand, 1,300. Turkey, almost 5,500. Great Britain, 14,000. So the U.S., 300,000. The British, 14,000. The Canadians, 6,000. Okay, so this is being fought mostly by American and South Koreans versus North Koreans and Chinese. Okay? Now, guys, an incredible amount of respect when you go back 70 years and you talk to these veterans for each other, both on the Chinese side and on the American side. Like I said, some of these Chinese soldiers didn't have shoes, yet they kept coming. I don't know about you, but I'm like, okay, dude, you're freaking tough, okay? And the Americans that freaking withstood the Chinese here. The Chinese are like, man, I don't know how you guys held us off so long, okay? Because we way outnumbered you. So a lot of respect back and forth here for each other. So guys, how do I sum this up? So I had a guy that was interviewed from Wichita. It was in Wichita Eagle. The guy's name was Ray Koenig. And the interviewer for the Wichita Eagle did a great job with this guy. He had served in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II and then in Korea. And so they asked him about his time in Korea. Now, by the time he was in Korea, he was an officer, and he was on a Jeep. Okay, so if you're an officer on a Jeep, you got a driver. You sit shotgun. Okay, and then on the back of the Jeep is a mounted Browning machine gun. So Ray Koenig of Wichita tells stories about his time in Korea. And I used to read this article to my students. After a few years, I memorized it, so I'll just tell you Ray Koenig's story. She asked him, like, were you ever scared for your life in Korea? And what do you remember about it? And he said, the thing that really sticks out to me is the impact this had on the civilian populations. All of this down, up, back, and up. This is like a war-torn country, guys. Okay, and he said it's not uncommon to see, women out washing clothes in a pond or a lake as artillery shells are going off near them, and they don't even flinch. They're trying to live their life. And those of you that live out in the country, near the country, you know what a dirt road looks like with a ditch, right? And he said, some of these stories involve me riding around in the Jeep. And so one day he said they were driving around, they're coming down the road, and they see this like 6-year-old little girl, South Korean girl. And she's twirling something in her hand. As they get closer to her, they notice she is twirling a Chinese stick grenade. She doesn't know what it is. And so as they pull up to this little girl, she smiles at them, waves. They're like, put that down. She doesn't speak English. Put that down. They're doing this. And she's just smiling at him. They're like, holy God. Pulled out his gun, pointed at her, said, put it down. She dropped it, ran off, okay? They wanted her to see what she was playing with. So they pulled the pin on it, and they threw it into the pond on the side of the road so that she could see what she was playing with. But, he said just the fear of this girl was really close to killing herself, okay? The other day, they're driving down the road. There's bodies in the ditches. Civilian, military bodies in the ditches. They see something move. Stop the Jeep. Get out. Now, it's cold, so you just start feeling around or looking for breath. Touch the skin. It's either warm or cold, right? You're alive or dead. Warm or cold. Start feeling around in there, and they feel a little arm in there, really small arm in there. It's like a 2-year-old, okay, laying underneath other bodies. It's trying to play dead. It's a little girl, 2 years old, probably laying under her family. So they get her out. She's doing her best to play dead, shivering, shaking. And so they took her back to camp. And guys, we worked really close with the South Koreans. So as soon as she started hearing people, speak Korean, she opened her eyes and tried to go to them. But just, he said, witnessing that, knowing that this little girl was probably laying underneath the bodies of her mom and dad, or at least her mom, it was tragic. Last story. Going through a wooded area, dirt road, turn left, look up, boom. 2 columns of North Korean troops marching right at them. We're here to that wall, like that close. What do? Put it in reverse, back up, go, start shooting, get the Browning out. Now, if you start shooting at one column on the left side of the road and take them out, these guys are going to kill you before you can get that Browning swung around to the other side. Those guys know that if they open fire, that Browning's going to take out a bunch of them. So he's like, just go slow, go slow, go slow, go slow, go slow. And they're doing this. He said they're looking back and forth at each other, okay?
got to the end of that colony, so they hit the gas and got the hell out of there. I mean, they all thought they were about to die. Okay. But nobody pulled the trigger. Those were just 3 stories of Raycona. Okay. My uncle was a radio operator, never left the South. He liked to talk about the Korean boys, you know, the little South Korean boys that worked in their camp, and, you know, they do jobs for them and they feed them, give them food and stuff like that. Okay. Guys, this was really, like, the combat part of this in the North was extremely violent and extremely bloody. Okay. It was so cold, so cold. They talk about, you know, when you die, when a soldier dies and they fall like this, the body freezes like this. And so when you're trying to put them into body bags, you're having to break the arms and the legs to straighten them out to get them in the body bag. Okay, because the bodies are just freezing like that. Okay. So that was kind of what my dad did. So, all right. Well, hey, that's pretty good. All right. Did my best there. All right. Stop. You guys have a good one. Yeah.
It wasn't actually Korea, but